News.
Welcome to our viewers in the United States and all around the world. This is New Day. It's Thursday, October 17th. It's 6 o'clock here in New York, and we do begin with breaking news. Sad breaking news. Congressman Elijiah Cummings has died. According to his office, Cummings passed away at 2:45 Eastern Time this morning. The cause of death, complications from long-standing health challenges. Cummings had a heart condition. According to the Washington Post, he recently underwent a medical procedure that was supposed to keep him out of work for 1 week or so. The congressman missed 2 roll call votes last week and never returned to the job.
He was only 68 years old, John. Cummings served as the chairman of the House Oversight and Reform Committee and was playing a key role in President Trump's impeachment inquiry. Cummings was born and raised in Baltimore. That's the community he represented in Congress since 1996. He became committee chair in January after the Democrats won back the House of Representatives in the 2018 elections. He made headlines on New Day in 2015 in the wake of the death of Freddie Gray. Here was his emotional message.
I had my turn. I want them to have their turn. Simple as that.
What can you do for them? What do you do for them?
What I can do is fight for them. And I've got to make sure that people hear them. See, they feel as if nobody hears them. And I think we're beginning to get that. But I'm telling you, Baltimore can happen anywhere. And you've got people looking at us right now saying, oh, that'll never happen in my community. But yes, it will. But you got to have people that listen, and you got to begin to act on it.
I was there with Chris talking to Elijiah Cummings that day. He had been on the streets at night, putting his body on the line to save lives. There were demonstrations and protests. He went out overnight to keep people safe. He was beloved in Baltimore and also beloved on both sides of the aisle in Congress. Don't forget Mark Meadows from the Freedom Caucus, one of his best friends there.
I know. I mean, and I think that that's part of why he was such an important voice, is that he wasn't afraid to allow his emotions to come to the surface and to show, whether he was crying, like we just saw there in a very sad moment, or whether he was expressing his friendship and revealing a deep sort of affection for someone that people didn't know that he had.
I gave him my handkerchief to wipe away the tears after he talked to Chris, and he asked me if he could hang on to it because he was going to need it again that day.
Now I'm going to cry.
He was a great man and a great member of Congress, and as I said, beloved on both sides of the aisle. He was 68 years old. We're going to have a chance to talk more about Elijiah Cummings throughout the morning. There is other major news this morning. In just a few hours, one of the key figures at the center of the impeachment inquiry will testify before congressional committees. We're talking about Ambassador Gordon Sondland. He was supposed to appear last week, but he was blocked by the State Department. According to the Washington Post, he's expected to say there was a quid pro quo with Ukraine, but not a corrupt one. We'll try to explain what that means, and there are other new details about what he will say. Also today, assessing the fallout from the tense White House meeting on the U.S. withdrawal from Syria, Democrats say the president had, quote, a meltdown, calling the House Speaker a third-grade politician. Pelosi walked out of the meeting. The White House released this photo of the confrontation, somehow thinking it helped their argument. But it's now being used as the background on Speaker Pelosi's Twitter page. She obviously loves it.
Okay, but we begin this conversation with an extraordinary piece of presidential correspondence. President Trump wrote a letter to Turkey's President Erdogan warning him not to invade Syria. The White House confirms it was written last week on the same day that Turkey did begin its military offensive against the Kurds in northern Syria. So here now, we're going to just listen. Some of our colleagues read this in real time yesterday as they got it, but it's now been 12 hours, and I think that it deserves more analysis. So you and I are going to read this letter in full. Do you want to start?
You go ahead.
All right. Here we go. Dear Mr. President, let's work out a good deal, exclamation point. You don't want to be responsible for slaughtering thousands of people, and I don't want to be responsible for destroying the Turkish economy, and I will. I've already given you a little sample with respect to Pastor Brunson.
The president goes on, I have worked to solve some of your problems. Don't let the world down. You can make a great deal. General Mazloum is willing to negotiate with you, and he's willing to make concessions that they would never have made in the past. I'm confidentially enclosing a copy of this letter to me just received. History will look favorably if you get this done the right and humane way. It will look upon you forever as the devil if good things don't happen. Don't be a tough guy. Don't be a fool, ! I will call you later. Sincerely, Donald Trump.
So the letter was dated October 9th. That was 3 days after the two leaders had spoken by phone, when it's been reported that President Trump basically gave the green light somehow.
It's been announced by the White House.
Because he cleared the troops out of the area that they would have been in the way of. And so it's hard to know, really, John, what this letter means. If this is just a cover and the president's releasing it to show that he's being a tough guy. But whatever it is, whatever the point is, it didn't work.
I know two things. Number one, people are dying while this letter is being sent. The Kurds are dying. And number two, he handed out this letter at the meeting inside the White House with the House Speaker. We showed you that photo before. So I think it's part and parcel of the same mindset. Let's get more on that. Jim Acosta, Chief White House Correspondent, is here with us this morning. So we have this letter with this language that isn't exactly a PhD level.
Nothing unusual here.
Nothing unusual. And then you also have that White House meeting. Jim, give us the big picture here. What's going on?
Well, I think the president is playing a game of red light, green light. Remember, we all played that as kids. And the president, in his phone call with Erdogan, essentially gave the Turkish leader the green light to go into Turkey. And it looks as though, in a bit of cover, the president fired off this letter to say red light. The Turkish military did not get the response.
They said
did not
no
get
light.
The message.
They said no light. We see nothing.
Yeah, and Erdogan, once he got that green light, decided to do something he's been wanting to do for some time, which is to go after the Kurds in northeastern Syria. I will tell you, talking to people inside the White House over the last couple of weeks, they are very sensitive to this notion that the president gave Erdogan a green light. It is something that is gotten under their skin. And the vice president just a couple of days ago was standing in front of reporters outside the West Wing insisting that the president did not give Erdogan a green light when clearly that's what happened.
It's just hard to understand their reasoning, because if the president didn't give Erdogan a green light, why did Erdogan go in? In other words, if we hadn't pulled back the U.S. troops, that wouldn't have been possible. He hadn't gone in before that.
That's right. And this happens before. This has happened before with this administration. They're trying to pull the wool over your eyes, I think, to some extent here. Remember what the White House said in its initial statement that started all of this.
I can read it. Today, President Donald J. Trump spoke with President Erdogan. Turkey will soon be moving forward with its long-planned operation in northern Syria. Period. Period.
It doesn't say don't be a fool, don't be a tough guy. It says they're beginning their operation, and that in not just diplo-speak, but, in layman's terms, gave a green light to Erdogan.
I don't know.
No question about it.
I mean, the word that I just keep hearing is impotent. And I know, obviously, it has a double meaning, and I'm trying not to think of the other one. Right. But impotent, that this is the U.S. president who America can't stop, I guess, Turkey from going in there. If this is the letter, it didn't work.
Right.
Obviously, the atrocities that are being reported on the ground by our correspondents are still happening. The incursion is still happening. Yeah. So the conversation didn't work. The letter didn't work. And when the president signs off with, I will call you later, what does that tell us?
Yeah.
How is that conversation going to be different than what's on this letter?
And I think the key is the original conversation. And that is why you hear lawmakers up on Capitol Hill saying we want to see the transcript of this phone call between President Trump and Erdogan. I wouldn't hold your breath on that one. We've been asking for that. And I think it's also the reason why you have to watch these Senate Republicans right now. People like Lindsey Graham, even the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, they are deeply concerned, or they say they're deeply concerned about how the Kurds are being slaughtered at this point. And just listen to what the president was saying yesterday, talking about how they're not angels and how essentially they were mercenaries because we were giving them money and weapons and so on. Our other allies around the world are watching that.
Jim, very quickly, the reporting from inside that meeting. The White House released the photo. There were no pool cameras inside. This was a White House photographer. And for whatever reason, they felt it helped the White House argument to show this picture. Let's put it up on the screen so you can see Nancy Pelosi there standing up in a room full of men taking on the president. What went wrong here? The Democrats are saying the president had a meltdown.
They are, and if you read some of the readouts that came out of that meeting, it does sound as though he did have a bit of a meltdown. He referred to Nancy Pelosi as a third-grade politician. He claimed that he was personally responsible for taking out ISIS and that Mattis didn't do it because he wasn't, quote, tough enough. Pelosi was dishing it right back. At one point, she said during this meeting, according to a Democratic aide who released a readout, all roads lead to Putin with you, Mr. President. And I think that is what led to this, clash between these two leaders. And the speaker and the top Democrats in the room got up and left. But it just goes to show you this government right now in Washington is completely dysfunctional. The wheels are off. They've spun down the street. You're not getting this car back on the road. And it just, I think, underlined the fact that there should be no hope for Democrats and Republicans really working together on anything. As they were leaving the room, the president said, "We'll see you at the polls." I think that speaks volumes.
All right, we will analyze this photo more because you also have to look at the body language of everyone else around them and how uncomfortable they're in their heads bowed they look.
Who thought this was a good idea?
That's what I'm saying. He thought releasing this letter and releasing this photo helped his argument there. What does that say about his view of the world?
John,
we'll talk about that.
And I'll just say very quickly, it's all about his base.
Right.
End of story. That's it.
Okay, Jim, thank you very much for being here with us. We have more breaking news. It's a very busy morning. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson announcing just moments ago, he says there's a new deal for Britain to exit the European Union. CNN's Melissa Bell is live in Brussels with all of the breaking details for us. What do we know about the deal?
Alison, this 11th hour breakthrough, and no one had really expected it first thing this morning because Boris Johnson seemed so penned in by his own Brexiteers in his party, the concerns of the Northern Irish Party. No one imagined that any kind of compromise could be found between his administration and the European Union as they all scrambled to find some kind of deal before the 31st of October. Because bear in mind, Alison, that without it, the United Kingdom crashes out of the EU without a deal, and that was considered catastrophic from all sides. In the end, a last-minute breakthrough has been confirmed by both the European Commission here in Brussels and Boris Johnson, who's just left Downing Street to come here to Brussels, a deal. The negotiators have struck a deal that would allow for a deal to be found. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to happen because later today, the 27 leaders of the European Union are going to come here down this red carpet. It's going to be put to them. The expectation is they will approve it. But it then needs to head to Westminster for a special sitting on Saturday where British MPs will have to give their agreement to it. Still questions, even at this late hour, about whether the Northern Irish parties will give it their backing once it's put to a vote. But clearly a massive breakthrough here that has led immediately to a rise in the pound and hope that some sort of deal will now be found. John and Alison.
A major step, but not the final step. Melissa Bell, please keep us posted on the developments there. As we said, we have news all over the place this morning, including brand new details about what one of the officials at the center of the impeachment inquiry is expected to tell lawmakers in just a few hours. That's next.
New day.
In just a few hours, the U.S. ambassador to the EU will testify before impeachment investigators. Gordon Sondland was allegedly key to the administration's efforts to pressure the Ukrainian government to investigate President Trump's political rivals. Suzanne Malveaux is joining us now with a preview. What do we expect, Suzanne?
Good morning, Allison. Really a sad day on Capitol Hill as we have lost Congressman Elijiah Cummings. My condolences to him, but his oversight committee will continue their work today. We are expecting U.S. Ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland, to testify this morning. Now, Sondland, he's a hotel tycoon, just like President Trump. He donated $1 million to Trump's inaugural committee back in 2017. Well, he is now a key voice in this inquiry. And the big question, of course, is whether or not he is going to show up today after getting blocked last week.
He didn't say that at all.
Despite President Trump's constant swipes.
The whistleblower's report was totally wrong.
And the White House stonewalling Democrats' impeachment inquiry. More and more Trump administration officials and career diplomats are showing up, helping shape a better understanding of the president's Ukraine scandal.
The president's phone call to President Zelensky was really the tip of the iceberg.
This morning, Gordon Sondland is scheduled to testify, joining a growing list, including Kurt Volker, Marie Yovanovitch, Fiona Hill, George Kent, and Michael McKinley. The Republican donor turned United States ambassador to the European Union, a key piece to House Democrats' probe. A source telling CNN Sondland's planning to tell Congress he didn't understand President Trump wanted the Ukrainians to investigate former Vice President Joe Biden until after the release of the transcript of the July 25th phone call. Sondland was the person texting a week before that call with fellow U.S. diplomat Bill Taylor. Those messages released by House Democrats, writing, "I believe you are incorrect about President Trump's intentions. The president has been crystal clear. No quid pro quos of any kind," adding, "I suggest we stop the back and forth by text." Fiona Hill, Trump's former top Russia advisor, telling lawmakers Monday she viewed Sondland as a security risk. A source familiar with the testimony tells CNN. She reportedly testified Sondland often used his personal cell phone to conduct official diplomatic business and worried his lack of experience could be exploited by foreign governments.
Every single witness, every single one that has come forward has added to the richness and the texture of our understanding of this sordid affair.
After abruptly resigning from his position less than a week ago, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's former top aide, Michael McKinley, telling lawmakers the reason why he quit. Sources with knowledge of his testimony saying he blamed the details of the transcript from the July 25th phone call and Pompeo's lack of support for U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch.
None of the testimony seems to contradict in any way by anybody what we have learned in the whistleblower's complaint and the transcript that came out of the White House.
Now, Republicans continue to say that the Democrats are hiding their impeachment inquiry investigation behind closed doors, mainly going after Intelligence Chair Adam Schiff. But Schiff firing back now, saying that he's following the rules and the proceedings, quote, in a deliberate manner. John?
All right, Suzanne, thank you very much. Then there's this White House meeting, this closed-door meeting on Syria that left House Speaker Nancy Pelosi questioning the mental health of the president. So what happened behind closed doors? We have some of the new details next.
The impeachment inquiry. Stay updated, stay informed with up-to-the-minute breaking news and analysis. There's only one place for it all. CNN.com/impeachment.
All right, the breaking news this morning is this. Congressman Elijiah Cummings from Baltimore has died at 68. He'd been in Congress since 1996, and he was the chair of the House Oversight Committee. Of course, that committee involved even today with the impeachment inquiry. There's personal, though, and then there's politics, and sometimes the two are separate. Want to bring in Jim Acosta, CNN Chief White House Correspondent, and Dana Bash, CNN Chief Political Correspondent. Elijiah Cummings, Dana, the son of sharecroppers, in Congress since 1996 with friends, real friends on both sides of the aisle.
Of course. Look, this is, there's so many emotions. There's the personal, but then there's the political. There is the reality of where we are right now. He was the chairman of the Oversight Committee, which by definition is in charge of looking after the executive branch. It is, when you look at the balance of power and separation of powers, this committee was put in place to do just that. So he had been a critical player when it comes to these impeachment proceedings. Adam Schiff might have been the face of it in the last month because of the issue of Ukraine. He has been leading the charge, but Elijiah Cummings certainly was right there with him. And he is somebody who clashed with the president and brought out, one of the examples of not the best in the president when Elijiah Cummings went toe-to-toe with Mr. Trump, said he was, lashed out at him over an issue, and the president went back at him and started attacking his city of Baltimore. That is, in recent memory, one of the many things that we remember him being in the headlines for. But it's also, again, very personal. I mean, he's a sitting member of Congress, only 68 years old, is right there with his colleagues, had been every single day. And this is going to hit Democrats and Republicans hard.
Yeah, and he did all of his work with such emotion and such much heartfelt feelings and speeches. He often wore his emotions on his sleeve. He cried in public. His voice would crack. So obviously we'll have much more on Congressman Cummings throughout our program. But let's turn to something that was so important to him since he was pivotal in the impeachment, and it continues apace. Every day, Jim, obviously, big, huge breaking news today is Gordon Sondland. He's the U.S. ambassador to the EU. Just to remind people of why he's so pivotal, there was this text message that got a lot of people's attention. It raised a lot of eyebrows, and this was the text message between Sondland and Kurt Volker, who's the special envoy, on Bill Taylor. Sorry, I think.
Yeah, Bill Taylor.
Okay, Bill Taylor. So this was on September 1st. It says, are we now saying that security assistance, meaning military aid to Ukraine, and the White House meeting are conditioned on investigations, meaning of President Trump's political rivals? That's when Gordon Sondland says, call me. And so, of course, the question is from investigators, what did you say in that phone call? What happened then next in that phone call? And what did you know about those investigations?
Yeah, I think that call me in the other text was an indication that there might be a problem and that they needed to have a conversation over the phone instead of via text, something that could be kept in records for later days to come. The other thing that Gordon Sondland is going to be asked about is Fiona Hill's testimony. I mean, she gave some 10 hours of just explosive testimony earlier this week, and some of that involved Ambassador Sondland. At one point, she talked about how John Bolton, the former national security advisor, described Rudy Giuliani as a hand grenade that's going to blow everybody up. But she also testified that Bolton described this arrangement, what was going on between Gordon Sondland and Mick Mulvaney, the acting chief of staff, as being a, quote, drug deal. So obviously these are questions that are going to be asked of the ambassador. And is going to be how much did he know at the time and whether or not there was this quid pro quo. And there has been reporting that, he has said, well, there was a quid pro quo, but it wasn't an illegal one. Well, how does he make that distinction? And I'm sure lawmakers are going to have lots of questions about that as well.
Dana?
And he spoke to the president in the middle of all of this, that when he was trying to figure out how to navigate this question of whether or not the administration really was holding up aid, which he thought was and still thinks, as the sitting ambassador, is so important for Ukraine, whether or not that was happening because of run-of-the-mill corruption or whether it was really because the president of the United States wanted the Ukrainians to investigate his political opponent, Joe Biden. During that period, our reporting is that the ambassador picked up the phone and called the president of the United States. Right. What was that conversation like? What did the president tell him? And also, beyond that, what conversations did he have with Rudy Giuliani? And how did that play into what the administration, the people on the front line dealing with Ukraine, felt that they had to ask for and deal with?
Look, this is CNN's reporting on what Sondland will testify to today. Let me read it. Quote, if you wanted to get this meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky, then you could either abandon that or you could work through Rudy, the person said, again, describing what Sondland may say on Thursday. They came to understand that what Rudy wanted was a public statement by Zelensky to look at Burisma and the server in 2016. And Jim, big picture here, the White House didn't want Sondland to testify. They tried to block him from testifying last week, but he's part of this parade of government officials who's going anyway.
That's right.
And telling this story of what appears to be an alternate foreign policy run by Rudy Giuliani, not necessarily for the benefit of America, but for the benefit of the president.
Right. And remember, Rudy Giuliani is a private citizen. He is the president's outside lawyer. He is not a government official, and he's certainly not a part of the U.S. Foreign policy apparatus of the government. I think you've hit the nail on the head, John, and I think that is why Congress is taking a very close eye at all of this. This was a shadow or rogue operation that was being conducted by members of the administration. Some were up to speed on everything that was going on, and some were not. And it seems Rudy Giuliani and the president, all of the lines connect back to them in terms of what was known and when it was known. In terms, of the big picture here, John, I don't think we've seen anything like this since the days of Iran-Contra during the Reagan administration, when you saw a shadow foreign policy operation being conducted by the administration. I think there are parallels between this moment and that one. And I think that is why when you listen to some of the sources that we're talking to up on Capitol Hill, I talked to one earlier this week who was very familiar with what was going on inside this room when Fiona Hill was talking to lawmakers. This individual said that this is a pivotal, quote, pivotal week in their inquiry, in their investigation. When you talk to people who are looking into all this, they feel as though they are amassing information and evidence it presumably to bring articles of impeachment against the president. And I think Gordon Sondland is a key part of this today.
Yes, he definitely has answers. Whether or not he will share them with investigators, we'll find out
later.
That
is a big question.
Later.
How much will he share? Why does he want to go today and not last week?
Yeah, okay.
Well, last week the administration told him he couldn't. It's fascinating that he's saying, I'm going anyway, whether it's a subpoena or not.
Okay, well, we shall see.
The call is looking less perfect by the day. We could just
Dana, Joe, thank you very much. Jim, I should say. CNN Larry has learned that the investigation into Rudy Giuliani includes a counterintelligence probe. So what does that mean? How does that change the case? How much legal jeopardy is Giuliani facing? We break all that down next.
This is CNN, the most trusted name in news.
CNN has learned that investigators have been looking into Rudy Giuliani's business dealings in Ukraine for months, digging into everything from possible financial entanglements with alleged corrupt Ukrainian figures to counterintelligence concerns. Let's discuss with Eli Honig. He's the former federal prosecutor and CNN legal analyst. Okay, the pieces are starting to come together maybe for investigators. Here's our CNN reporting. The counterintelligence probe hinges in part on whether a foreign influence operation was trying to take advantage of Giuliani's business ties in Ukraine and with wealthy foreigners to make inroads with the White House, according to one person briefed on the matter. If this were the case, things would start to make sense for investigators, Ellie. You tell me if I'm wrong, because they follow the money.
Yeah, follow the money, exactly right. There's a reason that's sort of an axiom. A counterintelligence investigation is separate from a criminal investigation. They can both carry on the same time on separate tracks. I think everyone's sort of familiar with the point of a criminal investigation. The main point of a counterintel investigation is basically to ask, who is this guy working for, really? And with Rudy Giuliani, that is a very open and important question. I mean, we already know that he's receiving reportedly $500,000 from these two guys who were indicted the other day by the Southern District of New York. What's that all about? Whose interests is he really representing there? At the same time, he's representing powerful Turkish interests that come into play. Reza Zarrab. I mean, so whose bidding is he really doing? That's the question of the CIA.
Maybe he's doing his pocketbooks bidding.
Well, that's certainly his interest, right? And that's the problem. If you're compromised or if you're willing to take money from anybody, then you could be doing bidding of whoever can pay you.
Right, and that's not a defense. That in some ways is incriminating. Who's paying him and why is a key question, not just for the counterintelligence investigation, but also the criminal investigation here, Ellie. How much trouble might he be in? The Southern District appears to be investigating a lot connected to Rudy Giuliani.
Rudy Giuliani, as the former U.S. attorney for the Southern District, should know better than anybody how much trouble it is when the Southern District really digs into you. When the Southern District investigates you, it's like one of those full body MRIs. Like every aspect of your life will be examined. Finances, your political ties, every action that you take will be looked at.
He's going through a divorce, too, on top of all this, talking about tangled finances.
Right, but I mean, look, he could be in trouble on a lot of different levels. First of all, let's remember, he's out there openly soliciting Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden. We could have bribery, extortion, foreign election aid there. We know he's tied in closely with Parnas and Fruman, these guys who were just indicted. There's money flowing back and forth. We know the Southern District is looking at him for potential lobbying violations. If, in fact, he was representing Turkey, and he certainly did not register as a foreign lobbyist, that's a crime, too.
When Michael Cohen got ensnared in all this, he went to jail. Yes. He's in jail. But I hear some people say, well, with Rudy, they would want him to turn over everything he knows, turn over all sorts of information. How do you think that plays out?
Boy, I'm trying to think of the possibility of cooperating Rudy Giuliani. I mean, I've cooperated some bad guys with some long history, but Rudy would be really tough just because it's all about credibility. And he's all over the map. I mean, he's on TV contradicting himself every 30 seconds. So I've put some tricky people on the stand as witnesses. If I'm back at the Southern District and I have a chance to flip Rudy Giuliani, I would think twice and a third time about that.
Of course, there's also the subject of flipping those other guys now who've been arrested and indicted. Will they flip on Rudy?
That's a huge question. And one thing that's really important to understand in the Southern District, cooperation is all or nothing. In some other prosecutors' offices, you can cooperate just on whatever the specific charge is. In the Southern District, if either of these guys from the charge last week or any of the four guys cooperates, they're going to be a complete open book to the Southern District. The Southern District will know everything they know about Rudy and anybody else.
That is interesting. You have to say everything you know. You can't just say, well, I'll tell you everything I know about John Berman. You say everything.
Anybody.
And I know a lot. Okay?
Intriguing.
I'd flip
Call
you
me,
on Berman
Southern
anytime.
District. Thanks so much, Ellie.
Thanks, Allison.
All right. Happening now, Vice President Mike Pence and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo just arrived in Ankara, the capital of Turkey, to try to undo a calamity, perhaps make right a decision from the president that's had deadly consequences. They will meet with the Turkish president, hoping to persuade him to agree to an immediate truce and ceasefire in Syria, an invasion that Turkey only began after President Trump announced he would pull U.S. troops from the border to make it possible, abandoning America's Kurdish allies. In the Oval Office, the president tried to wash his hands of this conflict.
They have a problem with Turkey. They have a problem at a border. It's not our border. We're not a police force. As two countries fight over land, that has nothing to do with us.
I want to bring in retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. He is a CNN military analyst. General, not our border. That's how the president talked about the Kurds. He also called them no angels. And now we've seen pictures of Russians trotting upon U.S. bases there, and the U.S. having to blow up munitions dumps as they retreat. What's the takeaway to the president's words and the actions we're seeing on the ground?
It's both embarrassing and infuriating at the same time, John. It's pretty obvious that the president does not have a good feel for either geopolitical or strategic advantage provided by the military and the use of the military in different areas. The other thing I'd have to remind you of that a few years ago when ISIS was running rampant in this area, there were no U.S. Forces in Syria, and General Votel was giving a mission impossible to put a force together that would fight ISIS, which he did. It isn't the U.S.'s border, but those ISIS rebels or ISIS terrorists along that border certainly cause significant problems to the United States and most of our allies.
It was Liz Cheney who noted yesterday in this White House meeting, reportedly, the terrorists on 9/11 traveled 7,000 miles to blow up the World Trade Center in New York. Also at this White House meeting yesterday, the president was reportedly read comments from James Mattis about the risks of removing U.S. troops from Syria. And this was the president's response to that. Mattis was the world's most overrated general. You know why? He wasn't tough enough. I captured ISIS. Mattis said it would take 2 years. I captured them in 1 month. Mattis was the most overrated general. General Hertling, your reaction?
Yeah, it's a reaction to what was said. Remember, John, as all your listeners do, that Secretary Mattis, former General Mattis, resigned because of what he perceived to be the president's actions towards Syria. And he warned them, the entire administration and the president, that this would create a geostrategic crisis, not just in the short term, doing something for short-term gain, getting soldiers out of there, but in the long term. This is going to have second and third order effects, which concern me in the extreme. This is going to cause problems not only in the Middle East, but in Europe and in the United States. And I think that's what Secretary Mattis warned him about. And now he's bearing the repercussions of that and trying to place the blame at someone else's feet. And it's probably not going to work.
I want to put a picture up on the screen for you and our viewers to see here. This was inside the White House yesterday during that meeting with congressional leaders. You see the confrontation there between House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the president. Sitting next to the president is the chair of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, there. And you see, I think, the strain that this has put on the military as the president makes this case about withdrawing U.S. troops from Syria. I wonder if you have any guess of what General Milley was thinking there and just the overall morale inside the military as the president has chosen to take these actions and mount this strange defense that he has, saying it's not our border.
Yeah, Mark Milley is a good soldier. He's been in the military, in the Army for over 30 years. He's served in various positions, both in peacetime and a significant amount of time, I think over 6 years in combat situations. He understands the implications of this. He knows how dumb it is. He knows that he, as the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs, his primary job is to offer military advice to the president and to the Secretary of Defense. I would guess that he more than